Let's dive right in. For nearly half a century, the entire planet was locked in a struggle that defined generations. It was a strange kind of conflict. One fought not with direct head-to-head battles, but with spies and satellites, with propaganda and proxy armies. It literally shaped the map of our modern world. This was the Cold War.
Okay, so picture this. It's 1945. World War II, the deadliest conflict in all of human history, has just ended. Cities all across the globe, especially in Europe, look like this, just rubble. After 6 long years of unimaginable horror, the world was absolutely desperate for a lasting peace.
But that peace, well, it turned out to be incredibly fragile. You see, from the ashes of that huge global conflict, the seeds of a new, very different kind of war were already being planted. A struggle not of hot war, but of cold, simmering tension. And that brings us to the Cold War, a 45-year standoff between the world's two brand new superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. They would never fight each other directly, but their intense rivalry would be felt in literally every corner of the globe. So how did these two nations end up dominating the post-war world? Well, let's take a look at where they stood right after the fighting stopped in 1945.
I mean, the contrast here is just staggering. The Soviet Union was absolutely devastated. They lost a fifth of their entire population, and their industrial heartland was just gone. The United States, on the other hand, it came out of the war physically untouched and with an economy that was absolutely booming. And as President Truman said at the time, there was really no question about it. The U.S. was now the most powerful nation on Earth. A totally new world order was taking shape, with these two giants standing on the ruins of the old one.
So this new power dynamic, it quickly turned into a really stark ideological divide. The world wasn't just being split by geography anymore, but by competing belief systems that were about to carve the entire planet in two.
When you really boil it down, the Cold War was a battle of ideas. On one side, you have the U.S. pushing free market, capitalism, and democracy. On the other, the Soviet Union was all about communism, with a state-controlled economy and a focus on collective equality. And these weren't just economic models, they were two completely different blueprints for the future of all humanity.
And nowhere was this division clearer than in Europe. An iron curtain, as Winston Churchill so famously called it, came down across the continent. It separated the US-aligned West from the Soviet-dominated East. What was once just a map of countries became a map of allegiances.
And this division got formalized pretty quickly through military alliances. The West formed NATO, a pact that said an attack on one is an attack on all. And in response, the Soviet Union and its allies in Eastern Europe created the Warsaw Pact. The lines had officially been drawn. So, here's the big question. If they never actually fought each other directly, how in the world did this war play out? Well, it was fought in the shadows, through intense competition, and very often through the conflicts of other smaller nations. The number one tactic was the proxy war. The US and the USSR would arm, fund, and support opposite sides in civil wars and conflicts all over the globe. And this is such a crucial point to understand. While the superpowers themselves avoided a catastrophic nuclear war, the human cost was just immense. An estimated 20 million lives were lost, almost all of them in nations across Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And this happened everywhere. From the U.S. supporting anti-communists in Greece, to interventions in the Congo and Angola, to the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, the entire globe became a kind of chessboard for these two superpowers. The second major front in this shadow war was the absolutely terrifying arms race. Both sides started stockpiling an arsenal of nuclear weapons on a scale that is just hard to even wrap your mind around, enough to destroy the world many, many times over. At its peak, their combined arsenal held more than 60,000 nuclear warheads. This led to a chilling strategy that was actually known as Mutually Assured Destruction, or MAD, which is a pretty fitting acronym, right? The logic was terrifyingly simple. If either side launched an attack, the other would retaliate, guaranteeing the total annihilation of both. It was a kind of peace, but one built on the promise of global suicide. But the competition also reached for the stars. The space race was this epic battle for technological and ideological supremacy. The Soviets, they scored some big early victories, putting the first satellite and the first human into orbit. But the US, well, they ultimately claimed the grand prize, landing a man on the moon.
But in this world of two opposing teams, what about everyone else? Well, a lot of newly independent nations, many of them fresh from shaking off colonial rule, refused to just be pawns in the superpowers game. They started looking for a third way. Leaders like Nehru of India, Nasser of Egypt, and Tito of Yugoslavia began to forge a totally different path. They represented what became known as the Third World, and that wasn't a measure of poverty back then. It meant a third political bloc, independent of both the capitalist West and the communist East.
And together, they founded the Non-Aligned Movement. Its goal was to allow developing countries to stay independent of superpower influence and instead focus on their own huge challenges, like poverty, inequality, and the legacies of colonialism. Its core principle, which came from India's Nehru, was simple but also pretty radical for the time. Non-interference. Basically, you stay out of our business, we'll stay out of yours. In a world that was demanding everyone pick a side, this was a bold attempt to carve out a space for real independence.
For decades, this divided world just seemed permanent. It seemed like this was how things were always going to be. But in the late 1980s, cracks began to appear in the very foundation of the Soviet bloc, leading to a stunning and incredibly rapid collapse.
And the spark for this change actually came from within the Soviet Union itself. The new Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev knew the USSR's economy was failing and couldn't compete. So he introduced these two radical reforms, Glasnost, which meant more political openness, and Perestroika, a complete restructuring of the economy. He was trying to save the Soviet system, but instead, he accidentally opened the floodgates.
What happened next was just breathtaking. Empowered by this new sense of openness, popular movements demanding democracy swept across Eastern Europe. And then, in November of 1989, the ultimate symbol of the Cold War, the Berlin Wall, came tumbling down. By 1991, the Soviet Union itself had dissolved. The Cold War was officially over. It left the United States as the world's sole superpower. But it also left all of us with a question that still echoes today. The bipolar conflict ended, yeah, but did the divisions, the tensions, and the conflicts that it created ever really go away?